Hi y'all, Raidwald here. This is my final video in this current little series on rights I've been doing. Following up from last time, we talked about the limiting principles on what is a right. And today we're going to talk about the interplay of negative versus positive rights in the real world. So, again, I'm going to start off by restating my definition of rights. A right is a claim which is considered just by default for any and all human individuals simultaneously and to the same degree. Alright, next we need to define positive and negative rights. So, a negative right is a right which basically it's any right to not be interfered with. Any right which you can enjoy without other people's involvement. My right to life is a great example of a negative right. I can live without you having to do anything about it. I can be free and at liberty without you having to do anything about it. I can own property without you having to do anything about it. Now, positive rights are clearly the reverse of that. They are rights that require positive obligations on the part of other people, as opposed to what we just talked about earlier, which are negative obligations on the part of other people. They have an obligation not to kill me so that I can live. A positive right would be, for example, the right to a home, the right to own a home, or not the negative right to own a home, but the right to a home, the positive right to a home, means that somebody has to provide me with a home. It is my right, I have a just claim to it, and that claim, if ignored or not respected, has been violated, and by definition, this is an injustice. So, if I have a positive claim, a positive right to a house, then does everybody else in society simultaneously enjoy a negative right to their liberty? Now think about this. And sometimes it gets more fogged and harder to see what's going on just because we live in such a large society, because the costs of what's going on can be spread out so far and wide. So let's just say there's two people on a desert island. If one of those people has a right to a house, but does not want to build that house himself, then his just claim to a house must be fulfilled by the other person. In other words, that person has lost their liberty. To some degree, they have to spend some hours of their life working away to provide a house which must be given to the other person without price, without cost, without just compensation. Now, this gets more complicated because in our current society, home builders do get compensation for building homes, even in those societies which consider homes to be a right. So, let's add a third person into our little desert island. Again, we have the same situation. All of them are have a right, have a justified claim to a house, and at least one of them is unable to pay for one with just compensation. And for the purposes of this argument, it really doesn't even matter why, right? We could say he was lazy, or we could say he was unlucky. Whatever the case, he does not have the means to compensate another person for a house. Okay, so that means one of two things. Either the person on the island who is specialized in building houses is forced to give a house without compensation, like we just explained, in which case his liberty has been violated.
his liberty and his property, right? Because if he spends his time building that house, then it's his property to do with as he wishes. So it's a violation of his liberty and his property. And, since liberty makes up moments of life, it is to some degree a violation of his life. Or here's the other thing, we do compensate that man with goods provided by the third person, inhabitant of our island. So we have one person who builds homes, one person who has enough to compensate for those homes, and one person who does not. If that person who can compensate the other for the house is forced to do so, right? And this is what we're really talking about. It is force. He is forced to do so. For him not to do so would be, by definition, an injustice, and therefore his other rights would be forfeit. So if he does not provide for the right of the person who claims the right to a house, then his rights are forfeit, including his right to life. That is what we mean when we're talking about an injustice. When you've committed an injustice, your rights are forfeit. So, is this not a clear violation of his rights, both to liberty and property, and to the life that it took for him to produce that property? Can you really steal from that man in order to give to the man who has nothing? No. No, this is not a just claim. It may be a claim, but it is not justified. It cannot be enjoyed by all people simultaneously. It fails on most of those limiting principles already. Now what happens is when we get into a large society, we do pay the people building the house, so they are compensated, but who are they being compensated by? Well, they're being compensated by all the other people who have the means to compensate. And they're being forced to do so. It is not their choice. They are being forced to do so, and if they fail to do so, they have been considered to commit the injustice. This is clearly a violation of a far higher right, a far higher claim. And what it means at the very heart of it is that the person who did not have the means to compensate the builder of the house has a higher, more just claim on the liberty and the property of the other man than that man had for his own liberty and property. That is at heart the very essence of slavery. When you say one person, person A, has a higher claim, a more just claim on the labor and the fruits thereof of person B than person B has for his own labor and the fruits thereof, then you have recreated the very essence of slavery. And one more example to kind of drive it home, we have today the right being claimed to not be offended. This is a positive right. If you have a right to not be offended, then I do not have a right to speak, to freely speak, to speak whatever I want to say. My right to speech has to be curtailed if you really have a right, a claim which is justified by default, to not be offended. The problem is the very same people who will claim the right to not be offended themselves will deny that right to other people. They want that to be their own legal little privilege that they don't want to share with others. What do I mean by that? The very same people who demand that Muslims be protected against offense, and gays, and blacks, and all these people that they've considered we are allowed to feel sorry for, are perfectly happy to allow white people, straight people, men, and Christians to all be offended. They are happy to offend those people. But you offend any of the groups that they have decided are safe, are protected, then you have committed an evil, an injustice. And therefore, any act against you has become justified in their mind. We see this playing out almost on a daily basis now in the world. The Mizzou, the Yale instances recently, universities are just rife with this horrible mistake. It is inconsistent. It creates a double standard by necessity,
and it violates real rights. And it just needs to stop.
And I know that there are going to be people out there who agree with me on this, that these things have gone too far, that these ideas of rights are illegitimate. But consider other rights that we talked about earlier, like the right to health care or the right to a house, to be legitimate human rights. And I asked those people, what is the limiting principle that will prevent the one and not the other? What possible limiting principle can you put forth that will prevent someone from claiming a right to not be offended at the expense of somebody else's right to speak freely, which is something that, again, is derived both by my right to liberty and my right to life. And even when you're talking about printed expression or expression via the internet or anything like that, property is thrown in there too, right? Because if I can't own a computer, I can't use that computer to speak. If I can't own a video recorder, I can't use that to create a video to speak and provide that speech to a large audience. If I can't own a street corner, then my right to speak on a street corner is curtailed by whoever owns that property. If I cannot own a printing press, then I cannot print what I wish to express. This is, again, the rights to life, liberty, and property pretty much generate every other right. So, is there a limiting principle which will cut against the claimed right to not be offended, but will not cut against your claimed right to health care? How will you provide for that right without an egregious violation of another person's negative rights? I'm happy to hear your responses via video or comments, and I think I've really made all the points I wanted to make here, so I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you guys all for watching. Again, leave all your counter arguments, critiques, comments below. Rate the video if you liked it, even if you didn't. And if you have not yet subscribed, please click that subscribe button. And I will see y'all later.